Hello and welcome to another Rest of Season Top 150 show. My name is Adam Levitan. Each and every Wednesday on this show, I am joined by Michael Leone and Mark Dankenbring to talk buy lows, sell highs, trading in season-long rest of season rankings. Leone, good morning.
Good morning. How's it going?
Going well. Mark, how's it going?
Going great, yeah. Pumped to be back here for another week talking football with you guys.
There has been an avalanche of injuries. We also had some quarterbacks, or at least one quarterback, get benched. We'll get into all that here in a second. Just want everyone to know this is our rest of season rankings, what you're seeing right now on YouTube. This is not some BS list that we pull out of our ass. No, we spend hours and days among multiple people grinding to get these rankings as perfect as we can. You can get access to our rest of season rankings every week through DraftKit Pro or through our in-season product. At the end of this show, we will fire off one move to make. By the way, if you are into the NBA at all, NBA DFS, NBA props, be sure you check out what the Established the Run NBA team is doing. I joke a lot about grinding hard. The NBA team, I mean, I can't even describe what's going on back there in terms of getting the most accurate projection on every player, every slate, every day. It is a full undertaking. It can create a big edge because nobody else really is doing it like this. All right. Start with some of the things that happened here. Leone, we saw, sadly, Breece Hall go down. Jets did not hesitate. They could have been like, well, we'll go with Michael Carter and Ty Johnson for a little bit. They said, no, we have to have James Robinson, who just allegedly got benched or had his role reduced by the Jaguars in favor of Travis Etienne. They said his knee was sore, whatever. They trade him, 6th-round pick, likely will become a 5th-round pick by the end of the year. I'm not in a great position to talk about James Robinson because I have lost so much money betting against, fading James Robinson, being on guys in his backfield, and coaches consistently want to give this guy the ball. How do you think it plays out between Carter and James Robinson? Who would you rather have? Would you be looking to target Carter or James Robinson in any type of season-long market?
I think I'd rather have Michael Carter than James Robinson. I think the pass catching upside's a little bit better. I mean, Robinson has caught passes in the past for Jacksonville, so it's not like he can't do it, but I think that's more likely to go to Michael Carter. And just in terms of some of the advanced rushing efficiency metrics, Michael Carter has always rated pretty well. The problem for him was just that Breece Hall is awesome, more so than it is that Michael Carter is not good. And Robinson, on the flip side, has had a lot of negative rush yard stuff. He started off the season hot, but you do still wonder, coming back from the Achilles injury, like, does he have enough juice for the whole season? Now we've got this knee thing going on. So I prefer Carter to Robinson. I wouldn't be totally shocked if Robinson ended up with a higher split of the carries for the team, after he gets worked in for a couple of weeks. But I think Carter's going to have a bit more efficiency and a bit more work in the passing game. So that's going to leave him with better high value touches.
Michael Carter can play, man. I mean, Michael Carter was, I believe, a 2nd-round pick of the Jets. I mean, Michael Carter can certainly play. We'll see how it goes. I think that initially we're going to project the gap between Carter and Robinson wider in this first week than we will going forward as James Robinson kind of gets acclimated there. On the Etienne stuff, Mark, I mean, people are like frothing at the mouth over Travis Etienne right now. And admittedly, with good reason. We have him up to 24th overall. Now, they are coming out saying JaMycal Hasty's going to play a little bit. JaMycal Hasty has had some good runs. I thought JaMycal Hasty played okay for the 49ers in his opportunities when he had them. 24th is very, very, very high on Travis Etienne. Is there any merit, do you think, Mark, trying to capitalize on this froth for Etienne right now in the trade market, or would you just be holding?
I do think there's some merit there. Obviously, the workload should increase here for Etienne. And I think the biggest boost that we'll see in his fantasy value is that he's now going to get, the goal line carries, which James Robinson was kind of getting the favor there early on in the season. Robinson has 9 carries inside the 10. Etienne only has 5. We saw that change a little bit this last week, and those should be going to Etienne moving forward. So obviously the favor for touchdowns there. But he's already gotten kind of the work we were looking for in the passing game in terms of usage and utilization there. Like, he's been out there for all the 2-minute snaps, all the obvious passing downs, and he hasn't gotten the targets that we've been hoping for at this point. So there is still a little bit to be desired there. We're kind of like wish casting a bit, hoping that they do increase as the season goes along. And I think they probably will, just based on how much he's out there and how many routes he's running. But someone in the chat dropped someone offered them Jalen Waddle for Travis Etienne, and I would definitely consider that if you have a little bit of depth at running back, because I would probably take Waddle rest of season. Again, there is some added upside if Etienne does get more passing work, but really all this opens up is some more rushing work and goal line carries for Etienne.
Yeah, I certainly prefer Waddle. The problem is that on most of my teams, I did zero RB or hero RB where I'm already thin at running back, and so giving up Travis Etienne is not something that I could do, even if I prefer Waddle rest of season like we have here. I want to go back to you, Mark, on the Sam Ehlinger stuff. So I talked to Silva about it a little bit yesterday. I'm curious your take on how this plays out with Sam Ehlinger at quarterback, because Michael Pittman's ADOT has been so low. He needs so much volume, and he was getting it with Matt Ryan. In other words, we were seeing 50, 40, 55, 58, 45 dropbacks in games for Matt Ryan. I believe Matt Ryan led or is second in the entire league in dropbacks per game right now. I don't think that's going to be the way it goes for Ehlinger. So I am a little bit worried about Pittman. We dropped him to 37. I suspect some people might want to drop Michael Pittman more right now. What do you think about maybe going after Pittman, trading him away? What do you think the market is for Pittman?
I actually think selling low on Pittman might be the best thing to do. I have him in one league, and I am pretty deep at wide receiver. So I was thinking of trying to package him and Zeke and, maybe getting an RB1 or just a better upgrade at wide receiver. I think that's certainly interesting. I think this move for the Colts is just kind of signaling, a different style of play moving forward. As you mentioned, they've dropped back to pass so many times. Matt Ryan leads the league in interceptions. He was top 5 in sack rate. Has a lot of fumbles as well. And so I think Frank Reich, realized that wasn't working quite the way they wanted. And they want Ehlinger to go in there, run the ball a bit more with JT Hines, lean on their defense a bit. Hopefully Shaquille Leonard is back soon for them. So I think, it just hurts the passing volume overall there. I think Pittman should still have between, around a 25% target share, but we're likely looking at a dip in probably 8 to 10 pass attempts per week, which is about 2 targets for Pittman. So I think it's a decent spot to sell low. Obviously, I think everyone, sees this as a downgrade for the passing attack in Indy. So it's going to be tough to get, requisite value for Pittman. But if you can sell low, that's probably what I lean. Otherwise, I just hold and hope out that, Pittman does become Ehlinger's favorite target still and earns a 25 to 30% share.
Yeah. And I think that what we're going to see in theory is more JT. However, we did have to drop JT in the rankings due to efficiency concerns with Ehlinger. And also Ehlinger is going to take away some rush attempts. So I want to ask generally about running backs in a second here, but Leone, how do you feel about JT with Ehlinger? Because we have seen, rushing capable quarterbacks, if they start running some RPO stuff, if they can start making Ehlinger a threat, it can help and create bigger running lanes for JT. The one thing I was excited about, though, was all this pass game usage for Deion Jackson in week 6 and all this pass game usage for Jonathan Taylor in week 7. I was like, oh, baby, here we go. Indy running back spot getting a ton of targets. Now I'm like, God, I don't know. So what do you think about JT with Ehlinger?
I mean, I'm right there with you. Like if Matt Ryan could have been halfway decent, we almost got the nut outcome for JT, which is faster tempo, higher pass rate, but we just needed to be able to actually score some points on top of it. And it would have been an absolute smash, and we couldn't get there. And now Matt Ryan's benched. And yeah, the target share for him is likely going to come down and the pass rate's going to come down. So lower target share plus lower pass volume, that's going to be bad for JT. So you're really hoping to make it up in rush efficiency. Is this offense going to be put in a position to have more green zone touches for Jonathan Taylor? That's where he made his bank last year. Is having a mobile quarterback going to increase his rush efficiency? I think his yards per carry, for sure is going to come up, but to what extent, I don't know if it's going to be enough to offset the lack in, pass game work. And I'm a little bit excited for a mobile quarterback, but ultimately, it's not like Sam Ehlinger comes in and you're like, okay, this team's all of a sudden going to score a lot. Yeah. So I think where we have him is right, which is kind of splitting the difference. It's dropping him a little bit because there's more uncertainty and there's a little bit less pass work, but we still have some hope that just purely on talent, Jonathan Taylor is going to be really good. And he's someone that, very easily could move back up or just continue to move down after we see what it looks like with Ehlinger.
I mentioned running backs. We moved up running backs as a whole this week and kind of a macro thing. Why did we move up. I think we have 13 running backs now in the top 30. We only had 10 in the top 30 last week. Why move up running backs now as a whole, Leone? And what do you think about running back value as we get into the kind of middle part of the season here? Because we know one of the values of being light on running back early is there's going to be chaos in the running back position. There's going to be injuries. Every week that goes by, there's less time for that stuff to happen and for us to capitalize on it. So now, is it fair to say that running backs are actually worth more now than they were at the beginning of the season, if you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it is, because the concern with running backs beginning of the season, not only may they potentially get hurt over the course of this season, but it's also a spot where you can get super lucky, where you can draft a Kenneth Walker late and fill that running back spot, and you just hit a huge home run. And if you've drafted wide receivers early, you're flush. So there's less time for them to get hurt. There's also guys that have already broken out and volumes more solidified. Like, we feel better about Dameon Pierce than we did. We feel way better about Travis Etienne. Kenneth Walker has a stranglehold on the position, So all these things kind of work together, both micro in terms of those guys hitting and us feeling better, and then macro in terms of the time left in the season. And then one note that's just kind of random, something I noticed, but I was looking at like the expected wide receiver fantasy points, and like the top 10 performances in expected fantasy points, according to my stuff this season at wide receiver, all occurred in weeks 1 through 4. So just for whatever reason, the last few weeks, we haven't had some of the top, the receivers pop quite as much. And I don't know if that's a trend or just an aberration, but if we're leaning on a recent performance a little bit, the running backs have outperformed the wide receivers in that regard.
All right, let's go to the Arizona stuff. Mark got me. Mark was right, and I was wrong. I will say that it was just the absolute cleanest spot in the history of the world for DeAndre Hopkins. No Marshawn Lattimore and no Marquise Brown, and which I didn't see coming. And, maybe this was something I should have allowed for. Cliff actually used DeAndre Hopkins in a creative way, actually like get your player in a position to win. He did that with DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins was in the slot a ton. DeAndre Hopkins was out wide. He played both sides. He ran routes all over the field. That is not how Cliff has done things previously at all. So to me, this was a huge sign on DeAndre Hopkins. I'm not willing to take the complete L yet, but I think I'm on my way to taking the L here if Cliff is going to use DeAndre Hopkins like that. On the other side of the coin, Mark, Rondale Moore, and Evan and I talked about it yesterday. I mean, Rondale Moore is not an outside receiver, period. Do you think that he goes back in there? Because honestly, only one of them can really win in there, Hopkins or Moore. Moore can't really play outside. Hopkins can. So I could see Cliff doing something dumb, man. I could see it. But the way it is now, Hopkins rolls super valuable. What do you think of all the Arizona stuff? Would you be trying to sell? It's going to be hard to sell Rondale Moore right now after that game. But would you be trying to sell Rondale, buy Robbie, anything like that?
Yeah, it's a little tricky because we've seen week to week, Cliff kind of changes up the utilization of the wide receivers based on who's available. And now we're adding Robbie Anderson to the mix. So I think, I would guess Robbie and DeAndre Hopkins are primarily outside with Rondale in the slot. I'm guessing that is what's going to be the case. And then, if he does want to use Hopkins in the slot a little bit, they're clearly fine putting Rondale out wide. But it certainly hurts, just Rondale's target floor and upside too in this offense. They still have Zach Ertz healthy. You mentioned the Marquise Brown injury. Doesn't seem to be severe as initially noted, so he might be back eventually. I was high on Hopkins because I thought him coming in fresh against players that have been playing and getting banged up for 6 weeks was just a massive advantage for him since he wasn't coming off injury. I think that played out pretty well against the Saints, and kind of as every week goes by, I think that claim goes out the window a little bit. So with how strong of a game Hopkins had, I would be, kind of leaning more towards sell high at this point than buy high, especially with Brown potentially coming back for the fantasy playoffs. So, they have a good matchup this week against Minnesota. I think another solid matchup against Seattle the week after, but then things do get a little tougher towards the fantasy playoffs. So I do think if Hopkins posts another couple strong performances, you could potentially flip him really high. But, at this point, you held him this long. He performed well. Cliff used him in a creative way. So I think at this point, you just kind of take the wins. And if he keeps stacking them up, then maybe look to flip. But yeah, at this point, Hopkins looks like a pretty locked in, low end wide receiver 2, high end or wide receiver 1.
Also, just real quick shout out to Cliff. We call him a fake sharp, but Cliff just unnecessarily drew up a play so Hopkins could get 100 yards and Mark and I could hit the all over. So kudos to Cliff for that one.
Yeah,
Definitely.
we have Pierce and Hopkins back to back in the rankings, and this is like some of those spots where when you get to this point in the season, I would really think about team needs. I would think about matchups in the playoffs. Like if you have a good team that's going to be in the playoffs, like I would actually consider now matchups in the playoffs, game environments in the playoffs, whether and what you need in terms of depth. Think about what would happen if you were injuries to your team when we have guys really close like that. I think in a vacuum, I probably prefer Hopkins over Pierce, but like you said, we have it 34-35. I mean, it would come down to team needs, and that's it. Okay. Let's go. You know what? Let's talk about the Bengals stuff because this was actually exciting, Leone. I mean, for the pass rate over expectation nerds, I don't know what got into Zach Taylor, but Zach Taylor went from like, oh, we're going to start it off slow and kind of run, and he has turned it around to the point where they had a 21-0 lead against the Falcons, and they were out there slinging it. I mean, the game got a little bit close. Falcons cut it to 11 at one point, but they were just out there slinging it the entire game. I actually think at this pass rate and the way that all the receivers are being used, Tyler Boyd would be like a buy high for me. Like I think Tyler Boyd can actually have good games, solid game consistently, and the contingent upside if something happens to Chase or Higgins, is outrageous on Tyler Boyd. So I know it's hard to buy Tyler Boyd right now. I'd probably wait for him to have a more quiet game before I buy him, considering what he did last week. But I don't think this is like a fluke. Like you're gonna be able to use Tyler Boyd, in my opinion, a lot as a starter if they're going to sustain this throw rate. How realistic do you think this is, Leone? And should Joe Burrow be a priority for people over someone like Kyler or Herbert, stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really positive sign. It's back-to-back weeks with like a 20% pass rate over expectation, which is like that's a huge number. It was the highest pass rate over expectation I think we had all season, what they did last week. I mean, they called 45 pass plays in a game that was a huge blowout. And it's really good. There's part of me that looks back to last season and they had, week 7 and 8, they had like a plus 10% pass rate over expectation. And then they were negative 6 straight weeks. And then they closed out the season plus 15% pass rate over expectation and then went negative, week 18. And they were like kind of slightly above in the playoffs. So on one hand, last year they did this a little bit and it came back down to earth. On the other hand, it was so extreme what they've done the last 2 weeks beyond even those blips last year that I think it's pretty positive moving forward. I'm right with you on Boyd, especially I think as teams throw more too, they tend to spread it out just a little bit more. It's a little bit harder for guys to earn the huge target shares, and Boyd's the natural beneficiary there as the third guy where his target share comes up a little bit. So he benefits, disproportionately from the increased volume. As far as Burrow versus other quarterbacks, it's tough. We've seen an absurd ceiling out of him. I think I'd still prefer Kyler, but it's at the point where I think it's the same tier. And before the season, I thought Burrow was really overdrafted. And I think, if we see them for a third straight week be real positive PROE, we'll probably move Burrow up right into that Murray Herbert tier.
Yeah. Okay. Bucs stuff, man. So I think a lot of the Bucs, like what you think about the Bucs and what you think is going to happen, has to do with, like, do you think the team is just going to absolutely crumble? Like, do you think they're just like giving up? Brady's on tilt. He's 45. He's on team no sex now, allegedly. He's just going to quit in the middle of the season. I've heard that rumor. The coaches are saying, we got to see if these old guys can still play and see what the young guys have. There's a lot of warning signs that this Bucs team is just going to crumble. That said, I have learned not to count out Tom Brady here. I still think Godwin and Evans are playing at a really high level. The one that I think we're most concerned about is Lenny. And so for people who have Lenny right now, is this our last chance to sell him, Mark, before it devolves on Thursday into a full-blown committee with Rachaad White? Or are they going for it and they're going to stick with this elite Lenny usage going forward? What do you think about the Bucs stuff?
Yeah, is it bad to say I can't decide? It's really hard. I have Lenny in a couple leagues. I'm really struggling on what to do. I don't know what the sharp side is here in terms of betting on the Bucs. Like I lean towards it being, betting on Brady and this offense to get it going just with the talent they have and what we've seen the last couple of years. I think, it kind of comes down to if the offensive line can somehow start to play a little better. Their interior offensive line has definitely struggled, and that's attributed a little bit to Fournette's struggles on the ground. But certainly, we've seen a few really high pass rate over expectation weeks. And in those weeks, Fournette has caught, between 6 and 8 balls, got up to 10 in one game, is still the favorite for the goal line touches. So, I still kind of on this team that is a veteran laden team, has kind of an old style coach and Todd Bowles. I think they're going to lean into the vets until, just the wheels come off. So I kind of still lean on holding Lenny and not trying to sell low, but if you guys have a different take and can kind of sell me the other way, then I'm listening as well. But I want to be a little bit more confident in the Bucs.
Yeah, this is hard. I don't know if you have a take, Leone. I actually think that it's going to be close between Lenny and Rachaad White usage on Thursday night on the short week. And I think they use a second round pick on Rachaad White. I think they think he can play. And so, yeah, I personally think it's going to be 40-60, 35-65. And that's even with the Bucs like keeping their head in the game. Obviously, if the wheels completely fall off, Brady quits or something, then they'll go to Rachaad White fully. So there's a lot of risk with Lenny right now. Any quick take there, Leone?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd make a lateral move if you could, like maybe someone like DeAndre Swift or Etienne if you want to de-risk. And at wide receiver, like T. Higgins and Jalen Waddle, I'm pretty sure we're above market on both those guys. If you're doing okay at running back, I think those are fine moves to make. I'm kind of like Mark though. I'm kind of caught in between where I'm pretty pro Rachaad White, where you can still stash him, but I'm not totally out on Lenny yet. Tonight or tomorrow night should be a good indication though, because we've heard a lot of Rachaad White's theme this week. Let's see what that means. Does that mean it's 65-35 Lenny, or does it mean it's 50-50? Because there's a big difference.
All right. I want to explain the Kenneth Walker stuff for a second, because a lot of this is my fault. Preseason, before the season, I was out on Kenneth Walker and Rashad Penny, both. I just didn't think, I just thought Seattle was going to be terrible, and the pass game role for both. They were using Homer and DJ Dallas on pass downs. We weren't going to score a lot of touchdowns, I thought. And it was going to be they were going to split time. It was going to be really hard for either of them to get there. Leone, the controversy was Leone was in big time on Kenneth Walker. And so, people are like resurfacing like 3-month-old TikTok videos with me and Silva being like, Kenneth Walker is total dust. And they're not resurfacing the videos where Leone was like, Kenneth Walker is a league winner. So there's war out there in the TikTok streets. And I mean, and by war, I mean, our guys battling in the comments versus TikTok mouth breathers. But anyways, now we get into a spot where everybody's in on Kenneth Walker. Like, regardless of what you thought before, obviously everything's changed with Seattle. Rashad Penny goes down. Travis Homer goes down. Turns into like the nut spot for Kenneth Walker, who's had incredible matchups. Now everybody has the full 3.9 for Kenneth Walker. So now people are like, oh, well, now what should I do with Kenneth Walker? Mark, go ahead. Forget everything else. That's all water under the bridge. Me being wrong and Leone being right, that was all water under the bridge. This is a forward-thinking show. What to do now if you have Kenneth Walker?
I think Kenneth Walker is, shown he's basically like Nick Chubb at this point, just going to be really efficient running the ball. The Seahawks offensive line has really come around with their 2 rookie tackles. Like, they look strong. And he just, continues to break tackles in massive runs, has scored 3 touchdowns in his first 2 starts. So obviously that looks good, but the passing, or at least the targets haven't been there. He's been running routes and stuff, which, we've seen pointed to on Twitter. And I think that's like fair, that he's running routes, but like the Seahawks just haven't targeted their running backs all season. I think for Rashad Penny and Walker, their highest targets in any game this year is 3. So it's not like, they're going to have a massive pass game role. The DK Metcalf injury, I think, does open up some upside for them, potentially, changing the offense a little bit, maybe running some screens or something along those lines where they get him more involved in the passing game. But yeah, I mean, I think he's a low end RB1 in the positive game scripts we've seen the last couple of weeks. He's going to eat, he's going to get close to 20 carries and probably close to 100 yards. But I do think there is game script concern here. And, while Geno Smith continues to look really good, they did just lose DK Metcalf and they're not deep at receiver. So I think we could see this offense, struggle a bit more. And if the, if the offensive plays drop down into the 40s, which we've seen a couple times from them this season and often last season, it could be a struggle for Kenneth Walker. So I think if people are valuing him as just like a locked in RB1 every week, I think you could potentially flip him. But certainly he's a solid player and you drafted him in like the 9th, 10th round. So this is an absolute smash for him to be an RB1 at this point. But I do think there are some holes to poke.
Yeah, sure. And you mentioned Nick Chubb. Like, obviously, Nick Chubb's an incredible fantasy asset. I was saying sell Nick Chubb a couple weeks ago, and it's the same concerns that you're going to have with Kenneth Walker. Travis Homer and DJ Dallas are going to get in there on pass downs when they start losing games. Getting behind, you're going to need crazy touchdown efficiency.
Just one note, Dwayne McFarland tweeted this on Walker last week. He ran a route on 65% of their dropbacks, and he also played in the 2-minute offense. He played 100% of the 2-minute offense. So there are some bullish signs there. Obviously, Homer's coming back, and we don't know if that'll last. He did not play the long down and distance stuff, which we wouldn't expect, but there could be something where it's like almost like a better mix in to an extent in terms of that pass game role, where he's not like a full 3 down back, but he's like a 2.5 down back.
Yep. I want to spend a quick second on if your team is good, if your team is bad. I'll start with if your team is bad, Leone. We had a question come in through chat here. I have Kyle Pitts and my team is 2-5. What do I do? I don't think there's much you can do with Kyle Pitts. I don't even feel like talking about it. Like, there's not much you can do. You can't sell him, okay? But even starting him is hard right now. I'm still starting him in places where I have him, but man, they have shown that they are going to throw the ball 15 times, 20 times in a game, regardless of script. So you have a bad team. You have Kyle Pitts. I don't really know what to say beyond hold.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like Zach Ertz would be someone that short term has like a pretty decent floor. If you're not starting Kyle Pitts, it's because you're concerned about floor, and like Zach Ertz has had a really valuable role. And he's probably a little bit lower in our rankings just because we're still at his age and with Hopkins back a little uncertain about what it's going to look like long term for Ertz, but he's probably a good bet to outscore Kyle Pitts in the short term. But for the most part, the Pitts stuff, it's unfortunate. It's sort of like is what it is. I know he probably looks egregious at T6 to a lot of people, but we're still trying to keep the long view. It's the same reason why we didn't, drop Travis Etienne a whole ton 2 weeks into the season when Robin, it's the same reason why we didn't drop Kenneth Walker an insane amount, 2-3 weeks in the season, or Juju. Like, sometimes you got to hold on to these guys and hope the talent comes around. And that doesn't mean it will. If Juju had sucked the last 2 weeks, we would have just kept dropping them. And luckily it came around. It's not always going to come around, but when it does, usually the reward's a little bit more outsized than the risk.
Yeah. Okay. On the other side of the coin, Mark, if you have a really good team, I mean, one thing that I think handcuffs are more valuable on good teams. In other words, if I had Dalvin and I was 5-2 and I knew I was going to be in the playoffs, I can afford to give up some bench flyers for just having Madison or something like that. You know what I mean? So I think that's one thing that people with good teams can do. Any advice for people who are off to a good start in their fantasy league?
Yeah, I think grinding the waivers and stashing, potential upside running backs is probably the best thing you can do at this point. We've seen the attrition with running backs this season and just the turnover at the top. So, that's my number one strategy. I would also say if you're kind of planning for the playoffs, to target like wide receivers over running backs or tight ends because they're less likely to get hurt between now and then. It's all great to look ahead to a running back's great playoff schedule, but there's, still about 6 or 7 weeks until we get there. That's a lot of time to bank on them staying healthy. So I do think if you're planning for a playoff run, it's better to trade for a wide receiver or a quarterback, definitely more likely to stay healthy than a running back. So that's kind of my tips. And yeah, just try and grind the waivers. Or now that we're going through these bye weeks, week 8 isn't too big for bye weeks, but I think week 9 is a huge one. So maybe next week, if a team is desperate for a win, trade them a starter or two for like a higher end guy that's on bye or they can't necessarily play that week and kind of play just like the short-term versus long-term game for, what other team needs. It's certainly sharp to look around the league and kind of see if people need a win now week. And if you can offer them a piece short-term, that will help, but you can get a better long-term piece.
All right. One more topic, each of you here before we get to our move to make. The Wan'Dale Robinson stuff has been awesome on targets per route run. Leone, I would almost want to have him higher than we have him here at 101st overall, but maybe I'm just, too excited about my boy Danny Dimes crushing fantasy, being the key to best ball teams, no big deal. And now you get finally a legit wide receiver who is earning targets at a massive rate right now, and his role, I think, can only grow from here. I think there's room to be higher on Wan'Dale. What do you think about any Giant stuff, Leonie? Are you willing to rescind your Daniel Jones hate here and get on board with Wan'Dale? You're on mute, Leonie.
Oh man, tough scene for me with the mute. Taking the Daniel Jones L, muted. I think there's a good bit of upside with Wan'Dale. I know last week Mark and I talked through Wan'Dale versus Garrett Wilson, I believe, or maybe it was Elijah. Was it Elijah or Garrett?
Elijah.
And I was on the Elijah. Yeah, and I was on the Elijah side. I'm going to capitulate for sure on that one.
Let's
just
go.
A week later. Just seeing the targets per route run scale with more playing time, I think is huge. Because sometimes I think we make this assumption, oh, his targets per route run are so great. And it's like, well, then he plays 90% of snaps and like, oh, the targets per route run came down. And that didn't happen last week. And they just have nobody else. Like Kadarius Toney, Kenny Golladay are still not practicing. So I think there's a good bit of upside. It's just difficult. I mean, if you're being super nitpicky, like I might swap him and Rondale Moore in the rankings, for example. I think, Wan'Dale Robinson might have a bit more upside. It sort of depends what you're looking for. Like full PPR too. Remember, these are half PPR ranks. Full PPR Wan'Dale is going to be like have one of the bigger discrepancies because a lot of his value is going to be a high catch rate on short ADOT stuff, not necessarily big plays and touchdowns. So that makes him a lot more valuable than someone like, Darnell Mooney, where you're hoping to get there on some downfield throws eventually with Justin Fields. So your format depends a little bit there, but I'm mostly pro Wan'Dale Robinson.
All right. Last question here is for Mark. The Mike Williams injury, not great. I thought Mike Williams was having a really good season. Obviously, he had some floor games, but man, when he gets it going, he is so good. The injury is a high ankle sprain. They didn't give a timeline exactly. They said, I believe Brandon Staley's quote was, it will be weeks, not months, but weeks plural. And high ankle sprain has a really long and bad history of really messing guys up. I mean, if it's a bad one, sometimes it's better for guys to just break their ankle or break their leg than just have a high ankle sprain. So I'm pretty worried on him. I think personally, I would probably have it tighter between Mike Williams and Josh Palmer here. I know Josh Palmer's been bad this year, but I still think he has a chance in that Mike Williams role. What do you think about what to do with Mike Williams right now? I think if you have a bad team, I mean, I think you kind of just got to try to get whatever you can for Mike Williams, because by the time he gets back, if he gets back before the fantasy playoffs, like it's not going to be great. So what do you think about the Chargers stuff?
I agree. That would be my take. I would probably try and sell low on Mike Williams and look to a team that has started out really strong and could be planning for the playoffs and trade them Mike Williams now. He certainly isn't very desirable otherwise because they're going into their bye and it looks like he'll be out for at least a month, I would guess. So I think that's probably the only team that you could potentially, trade him to, maybe get back 2 starters and try and salvage something. But it's certainly bad for rest of season. I think we should probably drop him a little further. Like when I was kind of looking at this case, I was thinking, I'd probably take a handful of these guys above Mike Williams because, we've seen oftentimes when players return from high ankle sprains, they just aren't quite themselves. Keenan Allen will be back. We're assuming Austin Eckler will be healthy. So, the target share could probably be in the high teens rather than like the low to mid 20s that we've seen without Keenan Allen. So I think it's a sell low situation if you can.
Okay. All right. We've said enough. We've actually said too much. We've said it all. It is now time for the one move to make portion of the program. I'll give it to Mark. Mark's been absolutely on fire on these. I'll go to Mark first for the honors. One move to make.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm a little salty because last week, like during the show, we talked about selling Michael Pittman and Mike Williams, and I didn't make that the move to make. I went for Gallup, by Gallup, who airballed, but that's besides the point. This week, we are going to get back on track, and it's going to be buying high on Chris Olave. So, Olave has been elite thus far. Like his usage has been outstanding, but I still think you can buy high on him since he's a rookie. People will say, oh, Michael Thomas has been out, Jarvis Landry has been out. That's inflated his workload. But I just think Chris Olave is really good. He's 7th in the NFL in yards per route run, which is, basically right in line with Cooper Kupp. He's next to guys like AJ Brown, who we have locked in as wide receiver 1. So I think Olave has a great chance to finish the season as wide receiver 1. I'd be willing to trade someone like Michael Pittman for him, someone like Keenan Allen. Cortland Sutton, guys like that who have also performed well this season or have high, rest of season outlook, ahead. So I'd be buying high on Chris Olave.
Okay. Buy high on Chris Olave. Leone, go ahead.
Man, I feel like this is the toughest week so far for me for this, but I really like T. Higgins. I guess I'd buy T. Higgins, who he did have a very good game last week, going 5 for 93, but he had been dealing with the injury the couple weeks prior to that. And if that has people down a little bit, like Boyd and Chase outscoring him last week, maybe has people concerned, I think T. Higgins is just going to have some absolutely massive weeks down the stretch. So I would try to go out and get him. As far as like 1v1 swaps you could make for him, like maybe you could trade, Pittman and a lesser running back, and someone thinks that they're, making a pretty sharp buy low on the news on Pittman, something like that. And we have, fudded Debo a little bit. If you can trade Debo Samuel for T. Higgins, I think that's great. I guess we didn't touch on the CMC stuff too much, but I think there's concerns for the San Francisco pass catchers, mostly Debo with the addition of CMC there.
Oh, baby. Bad Debo games are like music to my ears. My family needs bad Debo games so badly.
Yeah, there's a question in chat about Debo for Olave. See, like that's I think a great one. Like I would trade Debo for Olave right now and get Olave.
Yeah, I would never have Olave in the first place. So clearly, Kyrie, you made a mistake there. I mean, I would never have Debo in the first place. So yeah. Anyways, all right. I'm gonna give 1.5. The first half one. I don't know if you guys have heard. There are some Jerry Jeudy trade rumors out there. I don't think it's very likely to happen, but I could still see it possibly. Even if it doesn't, I think Jerry Jeudy has underperformed relative to his talent level and what his role is going to be. You saw him have a really big game with, or a good game at least, with Brett Rippon last week. So I think buying Jerry Jeudy here and hoping he gets traded, or just hoping that he can flip it with Cortland Sutton the rest of the way, I think that's okay. But that's just a half one. That's not the real one. The real move to make that I have is 2 parts. The first part is sell Darrell Henderson. The second part is add Kieran Williams. And so I don't think they actually like Darrell Henderson. I really don't. I think that they've got themselves backed into a corner here. I mean, they hated Cam Akers. I mean, they essentially exiled Cam Akers, but they were still playing Cam Akers ahead of Darrell Henderson. I mean, they didn't want to do this. They don't want Darrell Henderson, but they don't have much of a choice now because they have total dust. Malcolm Brown, Ronnie Rivers, whatever. The guy they like, allegedly, is Kieran Williams. And so when Kieran Williams is healthy, I could see him being the lead back. I would try to get out from under Darrell Henderson before that happens. You can sell this person, whoever you're trying to trade Darrell Henderson to, you can sell them on, buddy, Darrell Henderson already came off his bye. He already had his buys behind him, and Cam Akers is done. You got to get on the D-Hendo train, You got to negotiate a little bit. You got to sell it a little bit when you try to trade someone like D-Hendo. So there you have it. Sell D-Hendo and add Kieran Williams in the process. That is going to do it for this rest of season top 150 show ahead of week 8. I appreciate you all being here. We do have a goal of 30,000 YouTube subscribers before the end of the NFL season. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. Would mean a lot to us. Also, if you need to be in the NBA streets, we have weekly and monthly. If you need to be in the NFL streets, we have weekly and monthly options available there as well. You just head up here, subscribe page, easy game. For Mark, for Leone, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.